Welcome to Ray Presents. I'm truly honored to have Mayor Mark Sutcliffe, Ottawa's 59th mayor, here with me today. Thank you, Mayor Sutcliffe, for graciously taking time from your busy schedule to join me here virtually on my platform. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ray. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing in our community to promote diversity, to hear from all kinds of different voices, and to spread a really positive message. So it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to have you here, especially to talk about topics that I love a lot, such as diversity and inclusion. So let's dive right in. I know you have given your diverse background. Could you share how your personal experiences shape your perspective on diversity and inclusion in Ottawa, and what steps are being taken to celebrate and amplify voices and diverse voices in the city?
It's a great question, Ray. And I guess I'll share my own personal background, which not everybody knows about, but my parents were immigrants to Canada. So I'm a first generation Canadian. I look like a middle aged white guy, but my parents come from a diverse background. My dad was from England. So that part of the story is not unusual for somebody who moved to Ottawa, but he moved to Ottawa from England in the 1950s. My mother, though, her parents were Chinese and French. So my grandfather was Chinese, ethnically Chinese. His family came from China, and he went to school in Paris, and he met my grandmother there.
Mm-hmm.
She was born in Paris and grew up in Paris, and they got married, which was an unusual thing at the time. They were a couple of mixed race, and they moved to China, and they grew up. My mother and her sisters grew up in China. They spent the first 15 to 20 years of their life in China, and then they moved to Canada at the time of the Communist Revolution in China, left everything behind and came to this country and started over. And so I grew up in a household with a family of mixed race and with different cultures and traditions around the table. We celebrated the Lunar New Year, and we celebrated other Chinese holidays, and there were little snippets of Chinese and French and English in my childhood. So it's in some ways a very Canadian story, and in other ways a bit of a different story. Not a lot of people I know have that particular mix in their background. So that's always shaped my perspective on things. I've talked a lot about the role of luck in my life. If my grandparents had never met, if my parents had never met, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. And it's a Canadian story. Ottawa was a very welcoming place in the 1950s to both my mother and her family, and my father, who came here on his own. And I've always reflected on that and thought about how lucky I am to have grown up in Ottawa and for it to be such a welcoming place. We have a long way to go as a community, as all places do, in terms of achieving full equity and equality, and really achieving the diversity and inclusion that we want. But I think we've already done a lot of very powerful and impressive things when you think about the times when we've welcomed Vietnamese or Syrian refugees or
Mm-hmm.
other people to this city. We've done a great job with that. And so Ottawa has always been a very warm and welcoming place, and I want to make sure that continues.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that story. I invite everyone who's watching to actually listen to your TED Talk that you've done some time ago, where you spoke about the element of luck. I love that. There was one quote in particular that you said towards the end that I really loved. And you said, "It's very easy to get people's attention over a sudden and immediate crisis. It's a lot harder to mobilize them over persistent problems in society for things like poverty, racism, and inequality." Why do you think that is? Why are we like this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the reality is it's very easy to get people fired up about something that's immediate, that's just happened, and that's a good instinct. You know, when there's a tornado that strikes our community, or when there's a family that's in need, and people hear their story and they rush to support that family. They donate to a GoFundMe page, or they bring food over to their neighbor's house. that's a great instinct, and it's part of what makes our community special, and part of what makes the human experience special. But it's harder sometimes to mobilize people around those chronic, persistent issues. That maybe it's because they don't flare up in an immediate kind of way. Maybe it's because they are chronic, and they sometimes seem so challenging. How do you solve them? I always talk about how we have challenges around our healthcare system in Canada. That's no secret, but how do you fix healthcare? I don't know how. I don't have the answer. You probably don't have the answer. It's such a complex issue. How do you fix problems that are persistent, that have been around for generations? How do you fix issues like racism? How do you fix issues like poverty? It feels like so many smart people have attempted to and not succeeded, and it makes it challenging, I think, to mobilize people around a solution. And that's why I think the best that we can hope for sometimes is to make progress, not necessarily to solve everything overnight, but to move incrementally towards a solution, and to think about ways that we can have an impact. It's the same with the environment or other challenges, to think about, well, what can I do in my sphere of influence? And I'll mention another quote that has always stuck with me. Bill Gates once said, most people overestimate how much they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate how much they can accomplish in 10 years. So, as we're speaking now, it's a time when people are still probably sticking to their New Year's resolutions. And at the beginning of the year, everybody always says, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I've got this long list of goals for the year. And they're probably at this time of year a little bit too ambitious, but you can't, you probably can't accomplish all of your goals in 1 year. You can't learn a brand new language. You can't necessarily become an expert in a new skill. But you can over 5 years or 10 years, and maybe that's the way we should be approaching some of these challenges, is first of all, to look at our own sphere of influence and how we can make a difference. How can our everyday actions make a difference? What can we do to contribute to equality and diversity? What can we do to help balance the inequalities in our society? And then also, what's the plan to move towards meaningful progress over a 5 or a 10-year period? Because that's how we can make a real difference over time.
That's perfect. So speaking about, making a difference with your role as a coach, as an advisor, especially in the private sector, how do you see, let's say, businesses contributing to tackling social issues like poverty and inequality in Ottawa? And are there specific collaborations or initiatives that you would find particularly promising?
The first thing I'll say is that I think it's really encouraging to me that for the first time in a long time, businesses feel a sense of responsibility around some of these issues. And I'm seeing that more than ever before. So I think there was a time, even as recently as 10 or 15 years ago, where a business owner could kind of look at the world and say, well, it's not my job to fix inequality. It's not my job to address racism. It's not my job to address poverty. I'm going to go out and run my business, and I'm going to do a great job. I'm going to produce a great product or service. I'm going to be a good employer. I'm going to look after my employees, but I'm going to mind my own business on the social issues. And I don't think that's as acceptable anymore, as accepted. And I don't think that's the expectation of business owners, nor is it their expectation of themselves any longer. I think now people who own businesses and run businesses, more than ever, they feel like they should be playing a leadership role in solving some of the challenges we have as a society. So I think that's really encouraging. And there's a lot of derision of social media right now, but I think social media has been a contributor to this, in that there's been an expectation that business owners and businesses speak out about social issues, about racism and inequality, about poverty and other challenges that we're facing as a society. So I'm encouraged by that, and I think there's more opportunity than ever for businesses to be involved in that, and they can each do it in their own way. They can be a voice. They can use their platforms to be a voice for inequality, for addressing inequality. They can put programs in place in their workplaces. DEI was not something we talked about in businesses 20 years ago. Now, so many companies have people responsible for that. They have committees, they have teams. It's part
Yeah.
of everything they do. So I think we've seen a lot of change. Again, it's not all gonna change overnight. But when you think about, just the fact that so many businesses and business owners, that this is on their radar now, it's part of their planning, it's part of their strategizing, it's part of their team approach. Think of the possibilities of what that can yield over time. The fact that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, so many businesses have turned their attention to that.
That's amazing. And, my hope and dream is that we're not so reactive. So, we're proactive. We don't have to wait for a George Floyd
Yeah,
incidents, unfortunately, to become, to see the change that we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years, and hopefully, we just want to do it because we want to make the society better for our kids who are growing up, and hopefully they grow up in an environment where things are much better for them, right? At least
absolutely.
that's,
And I think that's happening. And again, I never want to sound like the job is done, because we still have a long way to go and so much more work to do. But when you see things like the prevalence of land acknowledgements at public events, when you see business owners talking about diversity and inclusion, when you look, my kids are growing up in a completely different city than I grew up in, even though we both grew up in Ottawa. The Ottawa that I grew up in and the schools that I went to were predominantly white and not a lot of diversity in each classroom. My kids are growing up and they're around kids of all backgrounds, all kinds of different countries, many first generation Canadians. That's their experience, and it's not unusual to them. It's not foreign to them to be in that environment. They're used to it. It's normal for them. So they're going to grow up and they're going to be in workplaces where their expectation will be that this is embedded in the culture of the workplace, not something that requires effort or policies or that kind of thing. Their expectation will be that it's normal. And so I think there's been a real shift in attention and focus, and I think it's starting to yield positive results. I think it will take time, but I think what we're seeing for the first time is companies that really are living their values. And we never talked about companies having values before. It was mostly just about, did they have a good product or service? Were they good employers? Is it a good place to work? But now we hear so much about companies' values and the opportunity for companies to demonstrate their values. And so many of them are talking about values of inclusivity and diversity. And that has to yield positive results over time.
I love it. Love it. I especially like the fact that you spoke about your kids and how it's going to become the norm for them later on as they grow older to see, a diverse workplace, etc. I came into Ottawa in 1992 from Montreal. Originally born in Montreal from Haitian parents. I came here and I see the difference between 1992, obviously, until now, 2024, right? And my kids, I see them in the classroom. Teachers from diverse backgrounds, and compared to myself, whose first black teacher, professor, I had to wait till university to see
Wow.
a diverse, you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it's such a difference that we see right now, and I think it's we're
it's so
headed the
true.
right way.
Yeah, I think, I many times when I was a kid, there was one black kid in our class. That's it, and my kids are growing up in very diverse classrooms. And I think that's really, and the population of Ottawa's changed. You look at
Yes.
Ottawa. If you
Yeah.
if you go to the Rideau Center, or you get on the train or the bus, or you go to a Senators game or a 67s game or a Red Blacks game, you see the diversity that's present, and it's I think it's a wonderful thing. I love the fact that Ottawa is a very culturally and internationally diverse city. We're lucky because we're the capital. There are foreign delegations here from all over the world, and
Hmm.
diaspora, some of them big, some of them small, but diaspora from so many different countries. And you see that, you hear different languages being spoken. If you're walking around downtown Ottawa, I think that's a real strength of our city. And I think it creates so many opportunities for business and tourism, and attracting the best and the brightest employees to our city. There's so many foreign students who are coming to Ottawa now and studying at the post-secondary institutions in our city. And let's hope that we can find a way to keep those people in Ottawa, because they're smart people who bring a different background and different perspective and expertise to our city. Let's try to hang on to as many of them as we can, and they can contribute to the rich, diverse cultural fabric we have in our city.
I love it. I love it. That's definitely something I'm trying to do here on my platforms. Celebrate this diversity that we have, and just talk openly about the successes and the challenges that we have. And I think as long as we have a dialogue, I think we can do amazing things. Now, on a more personal note, I know you. Could you reflect on some highs and lows you've encountered in the municipal politics, shedding lights on the dynamic nature of this field and how it has shaped your leadership approach in Ottawa?
Well, it's been a fascinating experience, Ray. I can tell you that. It was less than 2 years ago that I decided to run for mayor, and I've been mayor now for, I guess, about 14 months, and it's been fascinating. It's been interesting. It's been challenging. It's very different in many ways, very different from what I did before. In many ways, some similarities. It's a lot about communications, and my business background has been helpful to me. But I've never had an experience like this before. And first of all, it's been a tremendous honor to be the mayor of my hometown, and to have an opportunity to contribute to my city, and try to make a difference. And it's wonderful going around and getting to meet all the amazing people throughout our city. And we've been talking a lot about diversity from an ethnic point of view and from a cultural point of view. But I'll point out that Ottawa is an extremely diverse city geographically. We've got a huge rural component to our city, a significant suburban component, and an urban component. And people forget that. It's a huge city, 2,800 square kilometers. It's, it takes you more than an hour to drive from one side of the city to the other, even if there's no traffic. And it's a wonderful, diverse place where there are rural villages, and there are farming communities, and there are great neighborhoods in the suburbs, and great downtown and urban neighborhoods. And to get to travel all over this city and meet the amazing people of Ottawa and see what they're doing, their innovation, their creativity, their generosity in so many ways, the volunteers, the business owners, the entrepreneurs, the not-for-profit organizations, the educational institutions, to get to witness all of that has been really remarkable for me. And I've learned so much from the experience. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been very challenging at times. We've had some big issues to deal with already in the first year.
Yeah.
But working with a whole new group of people around City Council and at the City of Ottawa and the administration at the city. But I've built some great relationships already, and looking forward to working with all of these incredible people to continue to serve the people of Ottawa for the next 3 years.
Hey, wishing you continued success. I was wondering, I know it's been challenging. Obviously, it's a difficult position to be in, but juggling a busy schedule like yourself, as a husband, as a father, as a marathon runner. I know you ran some pretty amazing race, the Boston Marathon, and obviously as a leader of the city. How do you find balance between your commitments in politics and your passion for running?
That's been challenging. I'll tell you, I've been running every day since I was elected, with a handful of exceptions. If I have a day where I'm traveling all day and I can't fit a run in, or if I just ran a marathon, sometimes the day after or for a couple days after, I don't run because I'm sore. But otherwise, I've been running every single day. It's been hugely important for my physical and mental health. I think it makes a big difference in my life. I've written about that before.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps me centered. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me sane. And so running has been a great tool for me, a great teacher for me as well. And it's been just as important for my mental health as my physical health. And so I've kept up the running, which has been great. I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful and supportive partner, my wife Ginny, and wonderful supportive kids who understand I've got a challenging job, and they do everything they can to help me. I have a great team and in the mayor's office at City Hall who support me as well. And somehow we find a way to make it work. It's a busy schedule. I will say, I was chatting the other day with a member of parliament from Vancouver, and the one good thing about being the mayor of Ottawa is it is an Ottawa job. I don't have to travel
Hmm.
every week to go to my home riding halfway across the country.
That's true.
So every night I might be at an event in the evening, but at least I come home to the same house as my family. I'm not staying in a hotel room somewhere, and I'm not separated from my family geographically. So there are busy days, but at the end of the day, I come home, I close the door, I go back to being a husband and father. I wake up in the morning, go for a run, come back home, check in with my kids, make sure they're ready to go to school,
How
and
early
then
do you do that?
head off to work. I run pretty early, usually anywhere from 5:45 to 6:45 is when I'll
Okay.
start my run usually.
Wow.
And yeah, get back home for 7:30, and then make sure everybody's doing okay and ready to start their day, and then I head off to the office.
It's amazing. It's amazing commitment. I love your story about qualifying for the Boston Marathon. How it took you numerous times in order to get there, and it shows perseverance. I definitely learned a lot from it, and I'll share it when I post a video on YouTube. One thing I see that I've done this a few times, those conversations with inspiring individuals, and the one thing that most of them have in common is a great team. As you said, you have a great partner, your wife, and your kids. It's fascinating to see that that's the one common denominator. Having a
Yeah,
great team, be surrounded by a loving team who supports your goals and dreams.
it's so important, and I'll tell you on a personal level. The other thing that makes it so powerful is that you've got to take the work seriously, but you can't take yourself too seriously,
Mm,
and you have to have perspective when you're doing your job. You can't be too hung up on every single little outcome, and having a loving, supportive family and a great environment to go home to every day really helps with that. So I'm able to not dwell too much on the ins and outs of the job. I'm always thinking about work and I'm preoccupied with it, but I'm not so preoccupied that it affects the kinds of decisions I make, or that I have too much emotionally riding on any one decision. Because in the end, I'm here for a good time, not a long time in this job. I'm not going to do it forever, and someday I'm going to go back to being a private citizen, with my wife and kids, and that's what really matters, and that's where my source of strength comes from. So I don't I want to make the right decisions and do the right things for the people of Ottawa, but I don't get so hung up on every single decision because of what it means for me personally, because I draw my strength and I draw my support and my validation from my family and not from the feedback I might get about my job. It's nice to get good feedback, but it's not what drives me. And so I think having a really strong family life is really, really important for anybody who's in a leadership role.
Thank you so much, Mayor Sutcliffe. It's been a privilege to talk to you about diversity and about your first year in office. It's a privilege talking to you. So once again, thanks again for for taking time to spend time on my podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure, Ray. And again, I want to thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being such a strong voice, and continue to do what you do, because it's making a big difference.